Out here tripping, man. Minnesota is tripping. Yes, they are. Let's get into it.
Couriers. Loyalty was enforced through debt, threats, and family pressure abroad. Their positions gave them protection. Court access delayed warrants. Legal filings stalled investigations. Bribes moved quietly. Border officers, local police, even senior law enforcement figures were suspected of being compromised. Drugs flowed north from Mexico and Colombia, then spread outward from Minneapolis across state lines. FBI linked the network to at least 24 gang-related deaths across Minneapolis. Violent incidents previously treated as isolated crimes before the organization was exposed. Investigators later confirmed the corruption extended beyond law enforcement. Court filings revealed direct links to the Somali-born mayor of Minneapolis, who allegedly provided political cover, delayed enforcement responses, and benefited financially. His guilty plea would later confirm that the network's protection reached the highest levels of city government. As the picture sharpened, surveillance teams picked up movement. 8:21 a.m., Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Khalif and Hodan arrived separately, carrying minimal luggage, newly issued passports, one-way international tickets, no public statements, no lawyers present. To federal agents, it was unmistakable. They were running. ICE and FBI units closed the terminal in sections, tracking the pair through cameras and facial recognition. At 8:27 a.m., before boarding could begin, agents converged. The arrest lasted 22 seconds. No resistance, no speeches, just cuffs snapping shut in the middle of the departure hall. With their detention, the network lost its shield. Within hours, prosecutors approved expanded warrants. Financial trails were unlocked. Names buried for years surfaced at once. What began as an immigration operation had now fully transformed into a national narcotics conspiracy. And Minneapolis was only the starting point. Comment yes if you believe this network survived because of protection from inside the system. And hit like if you want to see every name exposed. 4 a.m., 6 states, 1 clock. At exactly the same moment, federal warrants went live across Minnesota.
Thanks for joining in. Like and subscribe. Happy Wednesday.
Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and Michigan. More than 1,200 federal agents surged into position. FBI command centers coordinated real-time feeds as ICE, DEA, and DHS teams moved as a single force. Roads were sealed. Power grids were monitored. The operation unfolded with military precision. The first breach erupted in northern Minnesota. A reinforced door was blown inward. Armed lookouts attempted to scatter, but flashbangs detonated, collapsing resistance in seconds. Gunfire followed. Short, violent exchanges inside tight hallways. 2 suspects were shot while resisting arrest. 1 federal agent took a round to the shoulder and was pulled back under cover as the team advanced. 4:18 a.m., Milwaukee outskirts. A converted auto shop became a battlefield. A suspect opened fire from an elevated platform. Agents returned fire, neutralizing the threat. Inside, pallets of drugs were stacked shoulder high. Cocaine bricks stamped and sealed, fentanyl vacuum-packed by the kilogram, ready for immediate transport. 4:37 a.m., South Chicago. Simultaneous entries hit an apartment complex across 3 floors. Suspects fled through stairwells and rooftops. 1 fired blindly through drywall. Another attempted to dump a weapon over a balcony. Agents pinned them down, secured the building, and began methodical searches. Rifles, handguns, and cash were pulled from walls, vents, and floor compartments. By sunrise, the scale was unmistakable. Across 73 raid locations, federal teams encountered barricades, early warning alarms, and weapons staged for immediate use. 4 separate firefights erupted within the first 36 hours. 9 cartel enforcers were killed while resisting arrest. 2 federal agents were wounded but survived. The arrests mounted rapidly. By the end of day 1, 412 suspects were taken into custody, including over 260 direct cartel operatives. Dozens more were detained for weapons, trafficking, and conspiracy charges. By the end of day 2, total arrests exceeded 640 individuals, many tied directly to interstate drug transport, armed enforcement, and money laundering cells. Seizures matched the violence. Convoys rolled out loaded with tons of cocaine, fentanyl, and methamphetamine. Safes were cracked open to reveal tens of millions of dollars in cash. Armories surfaced, hundreds of firearms, magazines taped together, ammunition stacked by the crate. Digital forensics teams cloned servers on site, freezing transaction ledgers mid-update. What made the fighting more dangerous was proximity. Some targets were minutes from schools and residential neighborhoods. Drugs were stored beside children's beds. Weapons were hidden behind false panels in family homes. Every breach carried the risk of ambush or civilian casualties. By day 2, Federal Command confirmed it. This was not a local operation. It was a hardened interstate cartel network, prepared for violence and embedded deep inside America's heartland. This was not a sweep. It was a war. Comment justice if you believe this operation was necessary. And like this video if cartel violence should never be tolerated on U.S. soil. As the smoke cleared from the 6-state sweep, investigators began reconstructing what the network had done before anyone noticed it was there. The timeline was longer and darker than expected. Financial records, encrypted ledgers, and witness testimony showed the operation had been active for nearly 10 years. What started as small-scale smuggling evolved into an industrial pipeline. Drugs moved north from Mexico and Colombia, crossed the border hidden inside commercial shipments, then flowed outward from Minneapolis like blood through arteries. The volume stunned even veteran agents. Analysts conservatively estimated hundreds of tons of narcotics had entered the United States through this network. Cocaine for speed and profit, methamphetamine for control, fentanyl for devastation. Each shipment was broken down, redistributed, and pushed into cities and rural towns across the Midwest. The human cost was measurable. Emergency room data showed overdose deaths in key Minnesota counties had quadrupled over the past decade. In some neighborhoods, fentanyl-related fatalities spiked by more than 300% in just 3 years. Violent crime followed the drugs. Homicides climbed. Armed robberies became routine. Turf disputes escalated into drive-by shootings and executions carried out in parking lots and apartment stairwells. Every spike lined up with the network's expansion. Witnesses described how migrants brought in illegally were forced into roles almost immediately. Some drove shipments, others guarded stash houses. Many were trapped by fabricated debts, threatened with exposure, or warned that family members back home would suffer if they refused. Leaving was not an option. Cooperation was enforced through fear. The drugs did not stay in criminal circles. Fentanyl leaked into counterfeit pills sold to teenagers. Cocaine fueled gang violence and money laundering schemes. Meth kept users awake for days, hollowing out entire blocks. Social workers described neighborhoods where addiction spread faster than any public health response could follow. Behind it all was discipline. Routes were rotated every few weeks. Vehicles were abandoned and replaced. Communications shifted constantly. When law enforcement pressure increased in one area, shipments rerouted overnight. The network adapted faster than local agencies could track, until the hotel raid cracked the system open. As federal teams mapped the damage, a pattern became impossible to ignore. The violence was not random. The overdoses were not accidental. They were predictable outcomes of a machine designed to maximize profit regardless of casualties. In internal briefings, one figure circulated quietly. Tens of thousands of lives impacted, directly or indirectly, by the drugs moved through this single organization. For years, the network...
Thanks for joining in. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate it. Happy Wednesday.
Network operated in plain sight, hidden behind legal titles, community status, and institutional blind spots. Judges signed orders, lawyers filed motions, police patrols looked the other way. Meanwhile, entire neighborhoods paid the price. By the time the scale was fully understood, there was no debate left. This was not just a criminal enterprise. It was a long-running assault on public safety, and the reckoning had only just begun. When police and officials are involved, silence becomes deadly. Comment, no corruption, if you believe badges should never protect criminals. And like if corruption deserves zero tolerance. Once the arrest stabilized, the investigation turned inward. What agents feared quietly during the raids was now undeniable. The network had not survived for nearly a decade through secrecy alone. It had survived because parts of the system meant to stop it had been compromised. Interrogations from mid-level operatives began to align. Names repeated. Payments matched bank records. Phone logs connected officers to vehicles that should never have passed inspection. The corruption was not theoretical. It was documented, dated, and signed. Over the next 72 hours, internal affairs units moved in parallel with federal prosecutors. Subpoenas were issued in silence, lockers were searched, home safes were opened, and the list grew longer by the hour. By the end of the week, 12 local police officers had been arrested. Some had taken cash to ignore traffic stops. Others provided advance notice of raids. One officer admitted to escorting vehicles he knew were carrying narcotics, clearing intersections under the guise of routine patrol. Then came the name no one expected to see on paper: a sitting police chief. Investigators alleged he had accepted regular payments to redirect manpower away from key corridors and to suppress internal complaints. Emails recovered from archived servers showed deliberate interference in investigations, complaints labeled clerical errors, and evidence quietly buried. The betrayal cut deep. Public trust collapsed almost overnight. Officers who had spent years on the street found themselves questioned by their own communities. Protests reignited, not just against enforcement, but against the realization that criminals had worn badges. The corruption did not stop at law enforcement. Financial audits uncovered municipal officials who approved suspicious contracts tied to shell companies. Immigration consultants funneled clients directly into the network. Court clerks altered filing dates. Every small favor, every quiet shortcut added another brick to the cartel's protection. In closed-door briefings, prosecutors used one word repeatedly: ecosystem. This was not a single bad actor or a handful of bribes. It was an environment where corruption could survive unnoticed, normalized through routine, and justified as pragmatism. The network paid for silence, and silence became a habit. The consequences were immediate. Entire departments were placed under federal oversight. Pending cases were reopened. Convictions tied to compromised officers were flagged for review. Careers ended in handcuffs. Reputations built over decades collapsed in days. For agents who had fought through gunfire only days earlier, this phase of the operation carried a different weight. It was easier to confront armed traffickers than to accept how deeply the damage had spread. But the exposure served a purpose. By dismantling the internal shield, investigators ensured the network could not regenerate. Routes stayed closed. Repeatedly the damage had spread, but the explosion fire only days earlier. This phase of the operation carried a different weight. It was easier to confront armed traffickers than to accept how deeply the damage had spread, but the exposure served a purpose. By dismantling the internal shield, investigators ensured the network could not regenerate. Routes stayed closed. Replacements failed to move. Without protection, shipments stalled and alliances fractured. The illusion of immunity was gone. What remained was accountability, slow, methodical, and unforgiving. And for the first time in years, the system began to clean itself from the inside out. In the weeks that followed, Minneapolis began to change. The noise faded first. Sirens became less frequent. Helicopters disappeared from the night sky. Corners once claimed by dealers fell quiet, not because fear vanished, but because the supply had been severed. Federal analysts confirmed what local residents were already sensing. The flow of drugs had been interrupted at its source. Within 30 days, overdose admissions in key Minnesota hospitals dropped by nearly 40%. Street-level seizures declined, not because enforcement slowed, but because distribution networks had collapsed. Dealers who once operated openly vanished or turned on each other. Without protection, without product, survival became uncertain. The legal fallout was relentless. Federal prosecutors filed hundreds of indictments tied directly to the network. Charges ranged from narcotics trafficking and weapons violations to racketeering, human smuggling, money laundering, and corruption. Several cases were immediately designated as high-priority national security prosecutions, fast-tracked through federal courts. For Khalif Noor Elmi and Hodan Ilays Noor, the fall was absolute. Their assets were frozen within hours. Properties seized, accounts drained and cataloged. Courtrooms where Khalif once presided became places where his name was spoken only in reference to conspiracy and abuse of power. Hodan's legal credentials were suspended pending disbarment. Her professional legacy erased almost overnight, but the damage extended far beyond two names. Families came forward. Parents who had lost children to overdoses, residents who had fled neighborhoods consumed by violence, migrants who described being trapped in a system they never understood until it was too late. Their stories filled transcripts, affidavits, and closed-session testimonies that painted a picture of long-term harm impossible to ignore. Federal officials acknowledged the scale openly. This operation, they said, was not a victory. It was a warning, a demonstration of how quickly organized crime could root itself inside legal institutions when oversight failed and complacency set in. The cartel had not relied on brute force alone. It relied on trust, appearances, and silence. That silence was broken. New oversight measures were announced. Joint task forces were expanded. Data sharing protocols were tightened. For the first time in years, federal and local agencies operated without internal obstruction. The gaps that once allowed the network to thrive were sealed, one by one. Still, no one claimed the city was healed. Too many lives had already been lost. Too many neighborhoods had been hollowed out by addiction and fear. The scars would not fade quickly, and some would never fade at all. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The myth of untouchability was gone. The belief that power, status, or connections could shield criminal empires from accountability had collapsed under the weight of evidence and enforcement. What began with a single gunshot had unraveled a decade-long conspiracy and forced a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. For Minneapolis and for the states caught in the network's shadow, the message was clear. The danger had been real, the cost had been staggering, and when the line was finally crossed, the response was absolute. When the final warrants were served and the last evidence silence, the kind that forces a reckoning. For years, danger had moved quietly through courtrooms, neighborhoods, and highways, hidden behind titles, paperwork, and routine decisions no one thought to question. What the investigation revealed was not simply a criminal network, but how close an entire system came to breaking without anyone noticing. This operation proved a hard truth. Institutions do not fail all at once. They erode, one ignored warning, one delayed file, one compromised decision at a time. The network did not rely solely on violence or secrecy. It relied on comfort, on the belief that people in authority could be trusted without scrutiny. That belief became its strongest weapon. The lesson is uncomfortable but necessary. Corruption rarely announces itself. It wears familiarity. It hides in legal language, professional reputations, and closed meetings justified as procedure. When oversight weakens, power stops serving the public and begins protecting itself. By the time the damage becomes visible, communities are already paying the price in addiction, violence, and lives lost without headlines. This case also shattered a dangerous myth that crime exists only at the margins of society. Here, it sat behind desks, signed documents, and issued rulings. The most destructive actors were not those pulling triggers, but those opening doors, delaying consequences, and silencing questions. Law enforcement can confront armed threats. What nearly defeated this system was betrayal from within. Yet there is another truth in what followed. Once the internal shield was removed, the network collapsed quickly. Routes failed, payments stopped, protection vanished. Accountability, when applied without exception, worked exactly as intended. Oversight restored momentum. Transparency became a deterrent. The system did not heal overnight, but it began to defend itself again. The warning now belongs to all of us. Justice cannot be outsourced to titles or uniforms. It depends on vigilance, on the refusal to accept silence as normal, and on the courage to question authority when facts no longer align. When citizens disengage, corruption gains room to breathe. When scrutiny fades, criminal power grows comfortable. This story does not end with arrests. It ends with responsibility. Because the next network will not look exactly like this one. It never does. But the conditions that allow it to grow are always the same. If you believe no badge, robe, or position should ever place someone above the law, comment never.
The people associated with this drug trafficking organization stood ready to defend their operation with extreme violence.
U.S. Attorney Theodore Hertz.
Mexico. Other simultaneous.
The people associated with this drug trafficking organization stood ready to defend their operation with extreme violence.
U.S. Attorney Theodore Hertzberg says investigators also found 30 firearms, including an illegally converted machine gun, a silencer, and bulletproof vests.
4:23 a.m. Chicago, Illinois. The city was asleep. Streetlights cast long shadows over empty intersections. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through the silence like a knife. Most of the city wouldn't wake for another 2 hours. But federal agents were already moving. Unmarked black SUVs rolled through the industrial district without headlights. Tactical vans positioned themselves at 17 different coordinates across the metro area. ICE agents checked their body armor in the darkness. FBI teams synchronized their watches. DEA operators triple-checked their weapons. This wasn't a drug raid. This was a declaration of war. At that exact moment, across 21 other American cities, the same choreography was unfolding. Los Angeles, Houston, Phoenix, New York, Atlanta. Thousands of federal agents were executing the largest coordinated strike against narco-terrorism in United States history. The operation had a code name, Iron Fortress. The target was surgical and terrifying. The Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, two Mexican superorganizations that had transformed American cities into distribution nodes for industrial-scale poisoning. But this morning, the rules had changed. The order from Washington was explicit. Dismantle the network. Seize every asset. Arrest everyone. If you support the federal agents risking their lives to protect American communities from foreign drug cartels, hit like right now so more people see this story. Chicago wasn't just another city on the operation map. Intelligence developed over 19 months revealed something that shocked veteran investigators. Chicago wasn't a distribution point. It was the continental headquarters. The cartels had built a corporate empire on American soil. They owned warehouses registered under shell companies with names like Midwest Logistics Solutions and Great Lakes Distribution Group. They employed accountants with MBAs. They had logistics coordinators tracking shipments in real time. They operated armed security teams. They maintained payroll systems and employee benefits packages. They had built a parallel infrastructure. And they had help from the inside. The intelligence files contained names that made prosecutors physically sick. Border Patrol agent, county sheriffs, federal prosecutors, banking compliance officers, ICE deportation officers. People who had sworn oaths to defend the Constitution had sold their loyalty for cash. The betrayal wasn't isolated. It was systematic. As tactical teams approached the primary target, a massive warehouse complex on Chicago's south side, the breach commander gave the order over encrypted radio. All units. Green light. Execute now. The first battering ram struck the reinforced steel door at 4:28 a.m. Metal screamed. Hinges tore from concrete. The door collapsed inward with a deafening crash. Flashbang grenades detonated. Blinding white light. Concussive force. Agents poured through the opening. FBI. Hands up. Get on the ground now. Inside, the warehouse looked completely legitimate. Forklifts sat idle near loading bays. Pallet jacks lined the walls. Shipping containers were stacked in organized rows. Clipboards hung on
Thanks for joining in. Like and subscribe. Thanks for joining in.
hooks. A break room had a microwave and a fresh pot of coffee. It looked like any trucking operation in America. But agents knew what to look for. Behind a false electrical panel disguised as a circuit breaker box, they found the first cache. 84 kilograms of pure fentanyl. The powder was pressed into counterfeit pharmaceutical pills. Vacuum sealed in plastic bags. Labeled with distribution codes. NYC 09. Boss 15. Mia 31. The pills were perfect replicas of legitimate prescriptions. Blue oxycodone tablets. White Xanax bars. Yellow Percocets. Except these weren't medicine. They were execution devices. Each pill contained between 2 and 4 milligrams of fentanyl. Just 2 milligrams can stop a human heart in under 60 seconds. Medical examiners across the country had been documenting overdose victims with foam still in their mouths. This wasn't addiction treatment failure. This was chemical warfare. Agents pushed deeper into the complex. In a secondary building concealed behind a non-operational loading dock, they discovered the counting room. Cash covered 3 industrial tables. Vacuum sealers hummed on a workbench. Currency counters sat beside plastic bins filled with rubber-banded stacks of $20, $50, and $100 bills. The DEA Financial Crimes Unit would calculate the total hours later. $18.4 million in cash. Just sitting in a Chicago warehouse. But that was only location 1. Across the city, 16 other simultaneous raids were revealing the true scope of the operation. At a trucking depot near O'Hare International Airport, agents discovered 387 kilograms of crystal methamphetamine hidden inside hollowed-out truck axles. The engineering was sophisticated. The axles functioned normally while carrying cargo. At a storage facility in suburban Cicero, they found an arsenal. AR-15 rifles with filed-off serial numbers. Glock pistols with extended magazines. 50 caliber sniper rifles still in factory cases. Fragmentation grenades. Body armor. Night vision equipment. These weren't street dealer weapons. These were military-grade munitions being shipped south to armed cartel enforcers. The same enforcers who controlled entire regions of Mexico through systematic terror. The cartels weren't just importing poison into America. They were exporting the tools to defend their empire. By 7 a.m., as the sun rose over Lake Michigan, the scale of the seizures was becoming clear. The Chicago operation alone had netted 461 kilograms of fentanyl, 387 kilograms of methamphetamine, $18.4 million in cash, 97 firearms, and 14 vehicles registered to front companies. But the arrests were even more devastating. 73 suspects were taken into custody in Chicago. warehouse managers, truck drivers, armed guards, logistics coordinators who used encrypted apps to track shipments across state lines. And then there were the others. 4 Cook County Sheriff's deputies, a customs inspector from O'Hare, a federal probation officer, 3 Chicago Police Department officers assigned to narcotics enforcement. They were arrested in their homes before dawn. Their badges were worthless now. Comment exposed below if this level of corruption shocks you. It gets worse. The corruption wasn't limited to Chicago. Across the country, the arrests revealed institutional rot that went deeper than anyone had imagined. In El Paso, Texas, federal agents arrested Border Patrol agent Marco Salinas at 4:47 a.m. as he arrived for his shift at the International Bridge Crossing. Salinas had worked border enforcement for 11 years. He had commendations for drug interdictions. He had a spotless service record. He had also been waving cartel trucks through inspection for $18,000 per load. Surveillance footage recovered from his personal devices showed the system. Drivers would give hand signals, a scratch behind the ear, a tug on the collar. Simple gestures that told Salinas which vehicles to wave through without secondary inspection. He did it 53 times over 26 months. That's $954,000 in cartel bribes. In Phoenix, Arizona, a Maricopa County prosecutor named Jennifer Ortiz was arrested outside the courthouse where she had been prosecuting drug cases for 7 years. Investigators discovered she had been providing case files to cartel defense attorneys, witness identities, confidential informant names, surveillance schedules. People had died because of the information she sold. In Los Angeles, a senior ICE deportation officer was arrested after investigators discovered he had been removing cartel operatives from deportation lists. High-value targets who should have been detained and removed simply disappeared from federal databases. The payment for each deletion, $9,500. The corruption was methodical. But what stunned investigators wasn't the individual acts of betrayal. It was how organized the recruitment had become. Internal cartel documents seized during the raids revealed a human resources operation. The cartels targeted officials with financial vulnerabilities, gambling debts, mortgage problems, child support arrears, medical bills. They would approach with a small gesture, an envelope with $3,000, a paid-off credit card, a consulting fee for minimal cooperation. Then the requests escalated, and once an official accepted the first payment, they were compromised forever. The cartels owned them. One anonymous tip to internal affairs would destroy their career, their pension, their freedom. So they kept cooperating, and the poison kept flowing into American communities. By noon on that first day of Operation Iron Fortress, the numbers were staggering. Across 22 cities, federal law enforcement had executed 891 search warrants. They had seized 8,818 pounds of fentanyl. That's not a misprint. 8,818 pounds. To understand that number, a lethal dose of fentanyl is 2 milligrams. 1 pound contains approximately 453,592 milligrams. The seized quantity could theoretically produce over 2 billion lethal doses, enough to kill every person in the United States 6 times over. The methamphetamine seizures were equally massive. 13,700 pounds of crystal meth with an estimated street value of $390 million. Cash seizures totaled $142 million. Hidden in walls, buried in storage units, stuffed in safe deposit boxes rented under false identities. But the cryptocurrency wallets were perhaps most revealing. Agents recovered hardware wallets containing digital assets worth $87 million. The cartels had modernized their money laundering. They were using Bitcoin, Ethereum, and privacy coins like Monero to move money internationally without traditional banking oversight. They were criminals. But they were sophisticated criminals operating like multinational corporations. Type money below if you want to see exactly how they laundered these funds in the next investigation. The human cost became clearer as investigators traced the evidence. The fentanyl seized in Chicago alone was connected to 23 overdose deaths in the previous 4 months. A college freshman in Boston, a construction foreman in Philadelphia, a mother of 3 in Nashville, a high school athlete in Detroit. They bought what they believed were legitimate prescription pills from dealers who sourced them from distributors who got them from the Chicago warehouse. They were dead within hours. Their families would never know the pills came from a superlab in Sinaloa, transported through a network of corrupted officials, and distributed by an organization that operated with corporate efficiency. The cartels didn't see them as human beings. They saw them as revenue streams. Each overdose death was acceptable shrinkage, a predictable loss in a business model built on volume and velocity. But the investigation revealed something that gave agents hope. Not everyone had been corrupted. The task force that planned Operation Iron Fortress worked in absolute secrecy for 19 months. They couldn't trust local police departments. They couldn't trust Border Patrol field offices. They couldn't even fully trust their own agencies. So they operated in the shadows. A core team of 53 investigators from multiple agencies worked out of a secure facility in Quantico, Virginia. They used sealed indictments. They communicated through military-grade encryption. They built cases without leaving digital footprints. When they finally briefed senior Department of Justice leadership, the Attorney General personally authorized the operation. The message was unambiguous. The corruption would be purged. The cartels would be dismantled. America would not tolerate this occupation. The day after the raids, the Department of Justice held a press conference. The Attorney General stood at a podium flanked by the FBI Director, the DEA Administrator, and the IC Director. Behind them were evidence tables covered with bricks of drugs, stacks of currency, and assault weapons. The Attorney General's statement was brief and direct. Yesterday, federal law enforcement executed the largest coordinated strike against narco-terrorist organizations in American history. We arrested over 500 individuals. We seized enough fentanyl to kill every American multiple times. We dismantled a criminal network that operated with impunity on our soil. But this operation also exposed a cancer within our institutions. Federal, state, and local officials who betrayed their oath and facilitated mass poisoning. To those officials, you will face the full measure of justice. You are not law enforcement. You are accomplices to murder. The Attorney General walked away without taking questions. The message required no elaboration. In federal detention centers nationwide, arrested suspects were being processed. Most were cartel operatives, warehouse supervisors, drivers, armed enforcers, logistics coordinators. They faced conspiracy charges, drug trafficking charges, money laundering charges. They were looking at decades in federal prison. But the corrupted officials faced something worse. Under federal law, a law enforcement officer who uses their position to facilitate drug trafficking can be charged under RICO statutes, the same statutes used against organized crime bosses. The penalties often exceed those for the traffickers themselves. Several arrested officials were already cooperating. Border Patrol agent Salinas from El Paso provided a detailed confession within 8 hours of arrest. He described the recruitment, how a man approached him at a convenience store near the bridge, how the man knew his name, his shift schedule, his financial struggles, how the first payment was only $1,500, presented as gratitude for being reasonable, how it escalated from there. Within 4 months, Salinas was earning $18,000 per cartel truck he waved through. He did it 53 times over 26 months. He bought a new Ford F-450, a fishing boat, a vacation timeshare in Mazatlan. His wife thought he was doing private security consulting. Now he was facing 58 years in federal prison. The IC officer in Los Angeles provided similar testimony. She described a system of financial incentives combined with intimidation. After accepting the first payment, cartel operatives showed her photographs of her daughter's school. The message was clear: continue working for us, or your family suffers. She removed 197 names from deportation databases over 18 months. Some of those individuals were arrested in Operation Iron Fortress. Others had returned to Mexico and resumed cartel operations. The damage was incalculable. But the most shocking confession came from Phoenix prosecutor Jennifer Ortiz. She sat in an FBI interview room and described a shadow network operating inside the justice system itself. Judges who dismissed cases on procedural technicalities, defense attorneys on cartel retainers, bail bondsmen who functioned as money launderers. She described a parallel system embedded within the legitimate one. When investigators asked why she did it, her answer was chilling: because I didn't think anyone would ever find out. Comment justice if you believe corrupted officials should face maximum sentences for betraying their oath. The cartel infrastructure uncovered during Iron Fortress revealed sophistication beyond anything investigators had seen. The Chicago warehouses weren't standalone facilities. They were nodes in a continental supply chain network. Investigators mapping the operation discovered fentanyl precursor chemicals were manufactured in chemical plants in China and India. These chemicals, legal in raw form, were shipped to Mexican ports disguised as legitimate pharmaceutical or industrial supplies. Once in Mexico, the precursors went to superlabs in Sinaloa and Jalisco states. These weren't backyard operations. They were industrial facilities. Pharmaceutical-grade mixing equipment. Pill presses producing 75,000 tablets per hour. Chemists with advanced degrees. The finished pills were packaged and transported north. The routes varied. Some crossed through official ports of entry hidden in trucks carrying legitimate cargo. Others came through sophisticated tunnel systems. Some were smuggled by individual couriers. But most product came through the system. Corrupted border inspectors. Purchased way station operators. Bribed state troopers who ignored suspicious vehicles. Once inside the United States, drugs were routed to distribution hubs. Chicago was the largest, but others operated in Houston, Atlanta, Phoenix, and Los Angeles. From these hubs, product was broken into smaller quantities and distributed through regional networks. Street dealers bought from mid-level suppliers who bought from regional coordinators who sourced from the Chicago warehouse. It was a corporate supply chain. Efficient, redundant, ruthlessly profitable. Financial investigations revealed the cartels generated approximately $15 billion annually from United States drug sales. That money had to be moved back to Mexico and converted into usable assets. This is where money laundering became innovative. The cartels used trade-based laundering extensively. They purchased legitimate goods in America using drug proceeds. Electronics, vehicles, clothing, designer goods. These items were exported to Mexico and sold, converting dirty money into clean revenue. They also embraced cryptocurrency aggressively. Drug proceeds were converted to Bitcoin through peer-to-peer exchanges and Bitcoin ATMs in major cities. The cryptocurrency was transferred to wallets controlled by cartel financial officers in Mexico, then converted back to pesos or dollars through exchanges in countries with weak financial regulations. Some money was laundered through real estate. Cartel-connected buyers purchased properties in Miami, Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Houston. These properties were acquired through shell companies registered in states with minimal disclosure requirements. A luxury condo in Miami purchased for $1.8 million with drug money would be rented, generating legitimate income. After several years, it would be sold, and proceeds would be clean capital. The entire American economy was being infiltrated. Federal investigators estimated cartel organizations had purchased over $5.3 billion in United States real estate in the previous decade. That's not just organized crime. That's a national security threat. Share this video so more people understand the scale of what's happening in our communities. But Operation Iron Fortress didn't just target arrests and seizures. It focused on infrastructure destruction. Federal prosecutors filed civil forfeiture actions against 284 properties connected to cartel operations. Warehouses, residences, office buildings, storage facilities. These properties were seized under federal asset forfeiture laws. The cartels couldn't simply replace infrastructure overnight. Every warehouse seized was a logistics hub destroyed. Every vehicle confiscated was a distribution route severed. Every bank account frozen was a financial pipeline cut. The objective wasn't just arresting people. It was making continued operations economically unsustainable. And it was working. Intelligence reports in the weeks following Iron Fortress indicated chaos within cartel command structures. Shipments were delayed. Payments weren't being made on schedule. Mid-level managers were disappearing, either arrested or fleeing prosecution. The cartels were reeling, but investigators understood this was the opening engagement in a long war. The Sinaloa and CJNG cartels had operated for decades. They had survived military offensives in Mexico. They had survived leadership decapitation strikes. They had survived brutal internal wars. They would adapt and regroup. The question was whether American law enforcement could maintain operational pressure. 3 weeks after the raids, federal prosecutors began filing indictments across multiple jurisdictions: Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, Phoenix, New York, Miami. Each district handled dozens of defendants to prevent any single court system from being overwhelmed. The charges were comprehensive: conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, using firearms in furtherance of drug trafficking, corruption of public officials, RICO violations for those connected to organizations, pharmaceutical manufacturers to incorporate advanced security features into prescription medications, specialized markings, chemical coatings difficult to replicate. For decades, drug war policy focused on street-level enforcement, arresting dealers, seizing small quantities, prosecuting users. It failed comprehensively. Iron Fortress targeted infrastructure, logistics networks, corruption, financial systems. It treated cartels not as criminal gangs, but as terrorist organizations and enemy combatants requiring military-grade response. And it achieved measurable impact. The fight continues. Cartels still operate. Poison still flows. People still die. But the message was delivered. America will fight back with everything available. If you believe this fight is worth continuing, hit like now. Comment what you think should happen next. Share this so your community understands what's at stake. Subscribe so you see the next chapter in this war. This is only the beginning.
And defense bowing up in the second half, only allowing 6 points, and then offense slowly chipping away and finding a way there. Last 3 possessions to score touchdowns. I think it was a 66-yard drive, 76-yard drive, and then another 66-yard drive. Special teams played a factor throughout that game. We thought that it's a really good punt unit that they were facing, and yet we were able to get a couple explosive punt returns. Duvernay had a heck of a game for us. Cairo came up big for us. Those conditions, really, Soldier Field this time of year are not advantageous for many kickers, and yet Cairo has proven that he's a guy that we can't not just trust,
Bears,
but he'll come
baby.
through for us when we.
Let's go Bears, baby. Y'all see it? Yes. Let's go Bears. Let's go Ben.
Need them the most. So that was great to see. I thought the coaching staff did a phenomenal job throughout that game, just staying calm, cool, and collected, and making the necessary adjustments that we needed to make to help our guys out the most. And the veteran leadership, showed up as well, particularly at halftime. No one was panicking or anything like that. And there's a belief with this team that shows up each and every week. It's kind of who we are here at this point. First playoff game for a number of guys. So not only getting that experience, but also getting their first playoff win. I think that's going to bode well for us going forward. This time of year, every point matters, every play matters, every blade of grass matters. And so we learned that, throughout those 60 minutes there the other night. So
collectively, you guys leaned into the animosity of the rivalry. What was the thought process of kind of using that as fuel rather than just being real tunnel vision?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a big game. First playoff game at home in a while, and we hadn't won a playoff game in 15 years or so. But certainly the opponent in and of itself, it means a lot to the city, this organization, and that's something that we certainly play into a little bit as coaches and players. Is we know how big it is when Chicago plays Green Bay.
What did you make of the skirmish before the game at the 50?
Yeah, so no one wants to see that. That's not, both teams are highly charged. That's just, it's not something that we want.
Beyond go ahead. I was going to say, people have talked about, like, between you and LaFleur, the 2 wins things, the handshakes. Beyond, getting this important playoff win, why is this important to you, or is there something personal beyond that?
This is a rivalry, and city of Chicago, Green Bay, it needs to be a rivalry.
When you look at the rest of the coaches in the league, is McVay the best? Do you look at him as the gold standard among the rest of the coaches?
I think it's hard to gauge who's best and who's worst when it comes to the coaching sometimes, but there's no question about it. He is on the upper echelon. He does a phenomenal job. He has ever since he got to LA. All of his teams are really well prepared. There's no doubt that he's super sharp in the offensive side, but I think how he does it as a head coach, bringing all three phases together, is really critical to their success. I think he does a great job. Knows how to speak to the team with the pulse of the team and get the most out of them. I mean, there's a reason why they're in it damn near every year since he's been there.
You get fired up for that matchup of the chess match between you and him, the way players do when a wide receiver knows he's going against a particular.
Well, when you look at this league right now, all right.
Bears going to win the Super Bowl. The Bears going to go against the Patriots. We beat the Patriots last time in the Super Bowl. Let's do it, Bears.
Necessary adjustments that we needed to make to help our guys out the most. And, the veteran leadership, showed up as well, particularly at halftime. No one was panicking or anything like that. And, there's a belief with this team that shows up each and every week. It's kind of who we are here at this point. First playoff game for a number of guys. So not only getting that experience, but also getting their first playoff win. I think that's going to bode well for us going forward. This time of year, every point matters, every play matters, every blade of grass matters. And so we learned that, throughout those 60 minutes there the other night. So
Like collectively, you guys leaned into the animosity of the rivalry. What was the thought process of kind of using that as fuel rather than just being real ton of vision?
yeah, well, I mean, it's a big game. First playoff game at home in a while, and we hadn't won a playoff game in 15 years or so. But certainly the opponent in and of itself, it means a lot to the city, this organization, and that's something that we certainly play into a little bit as coaches and players. Is we know how big it is when Chicago plays Green Bay.
You make of the skirmish before the game at the 50.
Yeah, so no one wants to see that. That's not. Both teams are highly charged. That's just it's not something that we want.
Good. I was gonna say, people have talked about, like, between you and LaFleur, the two wins things, the handshakes. Beyond, getting this important playoff win, why is this important to you, or is there something personal beyond that?
This is a rivalry, and city of Chicago, Green Bay, it needs to be a rivalry.
When you look at the rest of the coaches in the league, is McVay the best? Do you look at him as the gold standard among the rest of the coaches?
I think it's hard to gauge who's best and who's worst when it comes to the coaching sometimes, but there's no question about it. He is on the upper echelon. He does a phenomenal job. He has ever since he got to LA. All of his teams are really well prepared. There's no doubt that he's super sharp in the offensive side, but I think how he does it as a head coach, bringing all three phases together, is really critical to their success. I think he does a great job. Knows how to speak to the team with the pulse of the team and get the most out of them. I mean, there's a reason why they're in it damn near every year since he's been there.
You get fired up for that matchup of the chess match between you and him, the way players do when a wide receiver knows he's going against a particular.
Well, when you look at this league right now, all right, where we're at in the season, there's going to be, after tonight's game, there's going to be 8 teams remaining, and all 8 are going to be really well coached. They're going to be really talented. It's just the way it is in the playoffs. Once you get to round 2, round 3, there are no weak links, and I got nothing but respect for the opponent that we're going to play this upcoming week, because they're damn good. They're number one in offense in a number of categories. Their quarterback's playing at a really high level, MVP caliber level. And defensively, they create a lot of issues for you. And so this is going to take our best foot forward here to win this one this week.
And then there's the belief that
in the post-game locker room, what did it mean to you to stand next to Caleb and then hear him get emotional, choked up when talking about the impact you've had on him?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't
Let's
see that
go Bears,
coming, but,
baby.
you know, it's why you get into coaching is you want to make an impact on the people around you, and you know, it meant a lot. It really did.
And we'd asked you, I think, about Caleb's emotions on Saturday night. You know, the TV copy had him getting in the faces of some of his teammates trying to get him going. You said you talked to him about it, or that it would come up. Has it come up since?
We haven't had a chance to sit down and speak on that specifically. We will. You know, I think we're all feeling a certain type of way, and you got to be authentic to yourself when it comes to the game. And you know, we all want to do well. We all want to have success. We want our teammates to do well. And so that's a part of it. And yet there is an accountability factor that goes into it as well. When I turn on the tape and I see a few things, particularly in our passing game, that weren't the way that we had talked about over the course of the week, sometimes you do need to get a little bit fired up just to make sure that the point gets across and that we play better going forward. So I don't shy away from that part of it.
I asked you over the year about Caleb finishing strong, but the start isn't as strong. Is it a talent for him to push through whatever it is that's bogging you guys down in the first, 3 quarters of the other night?
Yeah, I actually felt like he played pretty well for the entire 60 minutes. There's some things we're addressing here today that we feel like we can clean up and we can be better at in terms of, I get it 4 positions in the first half and we only get 3 points out of it. And yet, we kept, like I said, kept chipping away, and eventually we broke through that dam and turning from field goals to touchdowns there at the end. And so that was just the nature of that game. Yeah, I think we all want to start faster. I know that's been a theme here over the last 2 months of the season, it feels like. But we're going to go back to work here, and it's something we address. It's something that we correct and we look to get better from.
And where's
He
your
looked particularly frustrated? Caleb did, back to Pat's question on just his emotions. He looked particularly frustrated after the interception. What happened with him and Luther on that? Was it a miscommunication? Like, what did you see from him?
Yeah. I actually, that was one of the better interceptions you could have, to be honest with you. If you're not going to convert a 4th down, then turn it into a flip in the field like that's a big deal. So, there was a miscommunication on that play, and that's one that we're fixing.
Is that a mailbox thing, where did Luther just think he was open to stop? Or?
And you spent 2 years with Stafford in Detroit, and obviously you've played against him too. What did you take from your experience with him, and what do you appreciate about him as a
man? I've got so much respect for that guy. I mean, you talk about the ultimate competitor. He's one of the more supremely talented throwers of the football I've ever been around in my life. He's outstanding. I think he's a great teammate. But what I think second to none with him is his toughness, physical toughness. Like this guy's gone through a lot, and